Hello and welcome! Over the years there have been many portable handheld consoles, from the PlayStation Vita to the Nintendo DS, Game Gear, and more. But none have been as iconic nor as long-lived as the Game Boy. I grew up with a Game Boy Color. Many of my first experiences with video games were on a Game Boy, and to this day I still hold the platform in high regards. However, if you are a new user, do you really need to buy an older Game Boy, or could you just perhaps buy a Game Boy Advance SP, or even simply just emulate it to get the same experience? Well, here is my 2 cents on the matter. Today's video is sponsored by us at 16-Bit Virtual Studios. Over the years, I've designed and 3D printed many accessories, from my display stands to our styluses, our cases, and more. And I am proud at how useful I have found them to be and how well they've lasted over the years. If you are interested in my designs, you can download them for free, or if you wish, we can print them for you at 16bitstore.com. And if you use our offer code 16bitreview at checkout, you'll receive 15% off your next order if you order 2 or more items. When it comes to just picking one game system to play, the decision has never been easier than with the Game Boy line of systems. From the original black and white all the way to the last hurrah with the micro, each system has, in some form or another, with the sole exception of the micro, some form of backwards compatibility, which means that if you own a Game Boy Advance or the Advance SP, and if the game you want to play says Game Boy on the cartridge, it will work. But the question is, which Game Boy Advance compromises are you willing to make? Are you willing to sacrifice your headphone jack just to get modern luxuries like a backlit display? Or is the headphone jack too good for you and you're willing to compromise by playing your system at odd angles just to get the right glint of light so that the game is visible? Regardless of what you choose, from my years of using both of these systems, I find that the experience with both of them is about the same. They have the same sounds, the same button feel, the same overall gaming experience, and honestly speaking, I love both systems. Now, I am aware that there are mods that you can get which you can use to turn this system into the ultimate Game Boy Advance experience. But in my view, it's too pricey to even worth looking into it as a serious option. And if I am honest, even just getting your hands on another Game Boy Advance just to make the project cheaper is becoming more and more difficult to do these days as well. Which is one of the reasons why you may want to consider buying an older Game Boy. But I wouldn't actually advise buying the original Game Boy. There are many who love this brick, and I am sadly not one of them. Sure, its design is iconic and its controls have aged shockingly well. However, everything else about this system has not. Its screen is extremely blurry and motion, and its 4 AA batteries sure gives it a lot of battery life, but at a high cost and weight. Add to that the larger link cable connector, and you'll find that the only people that you'll be able to trade your Pokemon with are people who also have a larger link cable. That is, unless you can find a special cable like this one. Which is why, if you really want a black and white Game Boy system, I would recommend getting the Game Boy Pocket. It's lighter, uses 2 AAA batteries rather than 4 AA's, and has a screen which has aged like fine wine in comparison to the original. Sure, it's still blurry and ghost, but it's still a very playable system today. Add to that, it uses the same link cable as it's used on the Color and is compatible with the Game Boy Advance, and you're good to go with trading Pokemon across the line. And at the moment, the Game Boy Pocket is cheaper than the Color, so it is a very nice buy. But even then, it's a little more pricier than I'd recommend getting it for. But if the Pocket costs any more than it already does, then you might as well just skip it outright and get your hands on what is, in my view, the best of the original line of Game Boy systems, the Color. It has all the benefits of the Pocket, but with the addition of having a modern LCD, which means no ghosting, it returns to AA batteries instead of triple, and it has a faster processor, which Nintendo used to make exclusive games for it. Sure, there aren't many original Game Boy Color games, with highlights being Pokemon Crystal, Metal Gear Solid, the Oracle games, and Super Mario Bros. Deluxe. But what games are here are what I feel are essential to any Game Boy library, and you will be missing out on them if you don't have a compatible system. But you won't be missing out on these games if you have a Game Boy Advance though, which is why it is the one to get. That is to say, unless you get the Game Boy Advance Micro. I consider the Micro to be the black sheep of the Game Boy lineup. It has no backwards compatibility, it's expensive, and it's so tiny that if you need glasses to see, you will not be able to read what's on the display or arguably even play any games at all on it. For all intent and purpose, you should absolutely avoid getting this console. And yet, when I sold mine, I wanted to have it again so badly that I got this one. The Game Boy Micro is a rare example of a premium console from Nintendo. It has a metal chassis, smooth edges, a sharp look, and a crisp screen. If you can look past the lack of Game Boy backwards compatibility and the unique charger cable / link port, it's honestly perfect. And yet it is the most useless system of the entire Game Boy lineup. On top of the fact that it was expensive back then, and it's still expensive today. For all intent and purpose, you're better off just getting the bottom part of a Nintendo DS or DS Lite, and you'll get the exact same experience. And this trend of things becoming more and more expensive is not just limited to the Game Boy Micro, but it also impacts the Game Boy Advance, the Color, and heck, even the original Game Boys becoming more and more expensive too. And which makes it even harder to justify, or at least advise people to buy the original systems. Especially with how easy it is to just emulate these systems on quite literally anything else. And what amazes me is just how affordable it's become to get a device like the GBX cart, back them up on the GBX cart, and then just put them on whatever system that you have a Game Boy Advance emulator on. Heck, emulators like MGBA now will even let you trade your Pokemon, given link cable support. And I'm very impressed with these emulators. In fact, with a PlayStation Vita, I can pretty much carry around my entire portable game library in a single handheld. And plus, it saves me a bit of cash. If I didn't have these guys that are behind me, getting into the Game Boys would really be an unattractive prospect. And paying for the privilege to access Nintendo Switch Online doesn't really bode well with me too. So it's a really good compromise. But if you are looking for a Game Boy, it really is down to your preference. And the only ones, in my opinion, you should seriously consider if you're trying to just get into the series is a Game Boy Advance, just because it is backwards compatible with everything. And as for the difference between the Game Boy Advance SP variants, honestly speaking, it's not really worth looking into, since it is the difference between the Nintendo DS Lite and the Nintendo DS. And I don't think it's worth paying the extra to get the AG101 just because it has a technically better display. I have one, and I got that for Christmas years ago, but I don't think I would be upset if I kept my original SP, which I got for a Hot Rod. However, it is really down to preference, and emulating is very much a viable option, especially if you're trying to save a buck. But anyways, thank you ever so much for watching. I hope you have yourself a good day, and as always, take care.